Moon Missions by Stefan and Ben. The moon exploration started when the first man-made object reached the moon on September 14, 1959. The unmanned Soviet probe called the Luna 2 made a hard landing on the moon at 21:02:24. The far side of the moon was first photographed on October 7, 1959 by a Soviet probe called Luna 3. In an effort to compete with these Soviet successes, U.S. President JFK proposed the national goal of landing a human on the moon.
The Cold War space race and moon race between the Soviet Union and the U.S. caused both the U.S. and the USSR to expand their space programs and expand our knowledge of the moon and the universe. The Soviets remained in the lead of the space race for some time. Luna 9 was the first probe to soft land on the moon and transmit pictures from the lunar surface on February 3, 1966. The first artificial satellite of the moon was launched March 31, 1966, and was called the Soviet probe Luna 10.
On December 24, 1968, the crew of Apollo 8, consisting of Frank Borman, James Lovell, and William Anders, became the first human beings to enter lunar orbit and to the far side of the moon in person. Humans first landed on the moon on July 20, 1969. The first human to walk on the lunar surface was Neil Armstrong, commander of the U.S. mission Apollo 11. The first robot lunar rover to land on the moon was the Soviet vessel Luke Hood 1 on November 17, 1997, as a part of the Luke Hood program. The last human to stand on the moon was Eugene Cernan, who was a part of the mission Apollo 17, and he walked on the moon on December 1972.
Moon rock samples were brought back to Earth by lunar missions 16, 20, and 24. From the mid-1960s to the mid-1970s, there were 65 moon landings, 10 being in 1971 alone. But after Lunar 24 in 1976, they suddenly stopped. The Soviet Union started focusing on Venus and space stations, and the US on Mars and beyond, on Skylab and space shuttle programs.
In 1990, Japan visited the moon with the Hidden spacecraft, becoming the third country to place an object in orbit around the moon. The spacecraft released a Hagoromo probe into lunar orbit, but the transmitter failed, thereby preventing further scientific use of the mission.
In September 2007, Japan launched the Selene spacecraft, with the objectives to obtain scientific data of the lunar origin and evolution to develop the technology for future lunar exploration.
China has begun the Chinese Lunar Exploration Program for exploring the moon and is investigating the prospect of lunar mining, specifically looking for an isotope, helium-3.
China launched the Chang'e-1 robotic lunar orbiter on October 24, 2007. Originally planned for a one-year mission, the Chang'e-1 mission was very successful and ended up being extended.
India's National Space Agency, Indian Space Research Organization, launched the Chandrayaan-1, an unmanned lunar orbiter, on October 22, 2008. The lunar probe was originally intended to orbit the moon for 2 years, with scientific objectives to prepare a three-dimensional atlas of a near and far side of the moon and conduct a chemical and mineralogical mapping of the lunar surface.
Before the moon race, the U.S. had pre-projects for scientific and military moon bases, the Lunex project and Project Horizon. Besides manned landings, the abandoned Soviet manned lunar programs included the building of a multi-purpose moon base, Zvezda, but the Outer Space Treaty prohibits bases or nuclear weapons to be on the moon.
The first 10 probes to be sent to the moon were unsuccessful, starting with the Able 1 on August 17, 1958. It's been over 40 years since we've last been to the moon. Thank you for listening.